Hi, my name is Bob Moore. I am a developer and VP of mobile for Alpha Software. And today I'm going to bring you through a tutorial, and we're going to show you how to build this full mobile application. With Alpha, you can build both desktop web apps and mobile apps, but in this tutorial, we're going to focus on mobile app development. And the thing that's unique about this tutorial is I'm going to bring you right through this from ground zero, and we are going to be doing a direct comparison to a tutorial that Apple has developed to teach new people how to use SwiftUI. And this, we're using actually the exact same data, the exact same pictures, and we'll actually be able to see what's the difference between developing a native iOS app with SwiftUI and developing that exact same app with Alpha Anywhere. So if you're interested, you can go to developer.apple.com/tutorials/SwiftUI. And this is the actual tutorial that we're going to be going through. We're going to be going through the first chapter, essentially, of this tutorial. And let me show you it actually running in Xcode, so we can see this is using a simulator in Xcode, and let's take a look at what it does. So it shows our list of landmarks, and it has a filter which we can turn on and off that will show us our favorites or all our different parks. And when we tap on a row in the list, it brings up a nice looking detail view. It's got a map that scrolls independently. The lat long is the map is centered on the lat long. We're going to put a marker in our map. A nice image here. It's got a white border with a drop shadow all around, and then we've got some information about the park. This is filler text in the data source, but you get the idea. And the whole panel scrolls, and the map scrolls independently. Also, notice there's a star. If I tap on that, we'll make it a favorite. Come on back over here, and you can see now Lake McDonald is one of our favorites. I scroll this. I can say, okay, show me only my favorites, and there they are. Now, let's take a look at that same thing in Alpha. So here we've got the iPhone 6 showing. I can't quite fit it on the full screen here and fit it within the confines of the video, but you get the idea. I can filter the list, only show my favorites. I can click on a row, and I've got a map, and we drop a marker in there so you can see where that is. You can scroll that independently. We can scroll this panel independently of the map. And then we've got the exact same layout here, and I can set my favorites. So Turtle Rock was a favorite, and now when I come on back, it no longer is a favorite. And let's go just take a look at another one. See the map centers appropriately, Twin Lake, and so on. So we're going to bring you through exactly what it takes to build this app from ground zero. Okay, to build the project, let's launch Alpha Anywhere. And in this case, I'm going to create a new empty workspace. So we'll use this workspace to contain all the different tutorial projects we might want to create. You can give it a name. In this case, we'll just call it Tutorials. And I'm going to locate this in a folder I already have on my C drive called Workspaces. So just an easy way to get to this. So the workspace name is Tutorials, and it's going to be in the Workspaces directory on my C drive. Click on OK. You can click OK here. This will open the web control panel when the workspace is opened, which is what we want to do. And so now we've really got a blank slate. The first thing you'll notice up here, the default project is loaded. And what I want to do is create a new project. I always like to give my projects, some name that I can work with. So in this case, we'll call this Landmarks. And we'll call it Landmarks 1 because we'll probably do more than one of these projects. And I don't need a Git repo in this case. Start with an empty project, and that's all we need to do. And you'll notice that this changes here. So now if you click on this little button here, you'll see you have both a default project and a Landmarks 1 project. That's the one we're going to work with. Now from here, we need to set some properties up for this project. Don't necessarily want the default. So the project style by default is alpha. I'm going to change that. I'm going to pick a version, an iOS theme that works well for this. So we'll pick this iOS 7 theme. And the next thing I need to change has to do with some JavaScript libraries that are going to load by default. So we do not need jQuery in this project. So we'll say, no, we don't need that. We certainly don't need jQuery UI. And the only other thing that we need to add is you're going to need to add a key for Google Maps, because we're going to be using Google Maps in this project. And you'll see there's a Google Maps API key and a Google Static Maps API key. I use the same, and I always just enter that in right here. So you're going to have to go to Google Maps to get that API key. And the way you can do that, let me just go ahead and save that. The way you can do that, if you go up into Help and open Documentation and do a search on, say, Google Maps API key, you'll get a listing. So getting a Google Maps JavaScript API key, that's what we're interested in. This whole article just brings you through the whole thing. So once you have that, save it in a note or something like that, and then you'll paste that into your project properties. Okay, so once that's done, we need to add some assets to this project. And the assets are included in a folder that is available in the comment section about this video. It'll be a zip file that you'll want to download, and it's going to be called Landmarks _Chapter1 _assets.zip. And once again, that link will be in the video description. So when you do that, an easy way to add all of these assets to this project, by far the easiest way I think, is if you click on this icon here, it's going to open the project folder up in Windows Explorer. So go ahead and do that. And now we're just in Explorer, and now we can do anything we want. So in my case, I've already got this file on my machine. It's in a tutorials folder, but you'll have to download it, and it's going to be Landmarks Chapter1 assets.zip. So let's go ahead and copy that. And now I'm just going to go back, and now I'm back into my Landmarks 1 web project. I can see that up here, Workspaces Tutorials, Landmarks 1's web project. And I'm just going to right click and paste. So now I've got the zip file in here, and now I'll right click on it and we'll just say extract all. Now by default, it wants to put all of these assets into a folder called the same name as the folder with the zip file, but I don't want that. So I'm just going to back this up here because I just want to put it in the root of the web project there and say extract, and that's all set. So now my structure looks like this. I've got a folder for some CSS. So there's a style tweaks that I've done, and there's some CSS here that we can look at. But we're gonna be referencing that in the project. There is an images folder that's got all these different images we're going to use. There is a JavaScript file in here that we're going to be using also. I don't want to have to type out all of the JavaScript I'm going to use, so we'll just load that in. And let's see, then there's a license folder. This is Apple's license information. A lot of the assets came from Apple because we're using the SwiftUI tutorial that they put together, and they say that we can use this free of charge. We just have to make sure that we reference Apple in here, and we do. So right now we could go ahead and delete this zip file here, so we can just delete that. That's fine. And right now we are all set. So you could go ahead and now just close this out, this Explorer window, and now we can see in Alpha we've got all these different folders, and it's set up the way we would like. Okay, notice over on the left side with the A5W pages is highlighted. I'm going to look at all files. So let's click on all files. And now I can see the data source for our project, and that is landmarks.json. I'm going to just double click on that so that we can take a look at it. In this case, it brought up one of my editors. And so we can see it's a JSON structure. You know, this could typically be included. It could be downloaded. Most APIs will send back JSON data, so it's a very common structure. And you can see we've got the name and the category and city, state, and so on, coordinates for longitude and latitude, and we can reference an image name in here. So this is going to be our data source for our list control. It will be adding to the project. Okay, we're going to start building our application by creating a new UX component. So you can do that a couple of ways. You can click on this new button up here and say that you want to do a web component. Double click on that and pick UX. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it, a little shortcut, is right here. By default, when you first fire it up, it's going to create an A5W page. But in this case, we want to create a UX component, so that's just a little shortcut to do that. And we can start with a blank component. Once that's done, we have essentially a blank sheet. And over on the left-hand side, you'll notice under UX, you have controls, properties, data binding, server-side and client-side events, different handlers you might want to use, JavaScript functions, JavaScript actions. There's a lot of different controls here. And then we get into data controls and panels and containers and so on and so forth. But one that a lot of people skip is this information one. So this is kind of nice because here you can enter in a description of what your component is. And I like to use this comment section here to make little notes, like maybe things that I need to add, or just little things about the component itself. So this is a nice little thing to know about, and I think it can be very, very useful. Okay, I'm going to go back to controls, and we're going to start out by entering a couple of panel cards. So those panel cards are going to be the basis of the UI for our mobile application. So go under panels, and we'll pick a panel card, and we're going to insert the opening and closing panel card, and that comes in. I'll enter in another panel card as well, because we're going to have two in this one, and we'll say insert after that. Actually, let me bump that down. These two, I want to bump down to here. So I've got panel card 1, I've got the closing tag for panel card 1 up here, and the opening and closing for panel card 2. And then I'm going to highlight all this. And now I'm going to put in a panel navigator, and we'll just insert that here. So the panel navigator encompasses panel card 1 and panel card 2. And by default, the panel navigator, this is the way we're going to navigate between the different panel cards, is set up for a carousel. So you could literally just run it right now, and you could swipe between these. The problem is there's nothing on these panel cards, so we wouldn't really be able to differentiate, well, which one's panel card 1 and which one's panel card 2. So let's just do something quick. We'll add a background color. So we can go to the panel body style, and let's just go into, let's just say the background color is going to be, and we'll just pick a color here. So let's pick like a light blue. Say okay. And let's go, so that's our first panel card. And our second panel card, let's go ahead and set that panel card background color to, say, a sort of a yellow of some sort. Okay. So now we have something to differentiate the two different panel cards. Next, I'm going to go ahead and check this mobile box, because we're building a mobile app. We want to see a mobile simulator when we go to run this thing. And now I'm just going to click on Working Preview, and now we can see there's our panel card 1 in blue, and if I swipe it, you can see the yellow panel card comes into play. So with the panel navigator, the default behavior is a carousel. We're going to change that because we're going to make this programmatic. But you can see we've got the two different panel cards there. That's running in working preview. Notice the UX right now is untitled. So this is a good time to save it. You can just go ahead and save, and let's just call this landmarks for our component, then we're done. So now we're working with the landmarks component, and we've got the panel card set up. We've got the panel card navigator set up, and we're ready to add some more controls to these panel cards. Okay, at this point, I'm going to change the names of these panel cards so that they more reflect what the content really is. So panel card 1, let's change the name of panel card 1 to, let's call that landmarks panel card. And let's change the panel card 2 to, and we'll just call it details panel card. Okay. You know, it's just easier to keep track of things, and especially as if things get more and more complicated. I just think, you know, using this kind of labeling makes sense. I'm going to change the panel navigator also from a carousel. I'm going to change the behavior. See the navigator type right here. I'm going to change that to programmatic. So what we're going to be able to do is be able to bring the detail view into view when somebody taps on a row in the list. That's the way we're going to do that. Now, if we take a look at the SwiftUI application, let's bring that in over here, and look at the structure here, we see this would be panel card 1, and there's a title here called Landmarks. Then we see there's a favorites only switch here, and then a list. So we'll start out by adding a panel card header that will have the landmarks text in it, and then we'll be adding a list that will populate with data. So I'm going to select the panel card. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to say I want to add a panel header, and it asks me if I'd like to include a control bar in the panel header. That's another type of control. I don't need that here because I really just need to enter in some static text. So I'll say no. And now we see another container comes in. This is the panel card header. And well, I'm going to highlight the first panel card header tag. I'm going to go ahead and click on other controls here. In this case, I really just want to put in some static text. And the static text, you could enter in any HTML you wanted here, but we're not going to worry about the styling right now. So we'll just type in landmarks and click OK. And so now we've got landmarks that will be left justified in the panel card header. And on the panel card itself, I'm going to go ahead and turn this background color. We'll just get rid of that, and we'll go with the default style for right now. And now if we were to click on working preview, we should see landmarks in the panel card header. And we do. So that's exactly what we wanted. And next what we're going to do is include the list control in this panel card. I'm going to go ahead and click on the design tab again. At this point, it's probably a good time to save your work. Just click the save button up here. And you're all set. So now what we want to do is add a list control to the landmarks panel card. And we want it under the header. So I'm going to highlight the header. And I'm going to go, next we're going to insert a data control. So this is a list control. And this is a comprehensive control. But let's go ahead and just enter that in. Let's call it landmarks. The label we actually don't even need to worry about. We could make it the same. Well, we probably should, but in this case, we're not going to even use the label. There won't be a label displayed. So we should be all set here. And now our list control comes in. Over on the right side here, we'll see the properties for the list control. So if I go between any, different controls, I see the properties for that given control. So here we've got the landmarks list, and the first thing we want to do is we want to fill the container. So in this case, it's going to fill all that's left of this panel card with this list. And to set the data source, we'll go into the list properties, click on that, and our data source by default is static data. In our case, we want to consume the data from a JSON file. So now we just need to specify the file name. And let's select a file. And our file is landmarks.json. Open that up. Okay. And that is now our data source. If we go in, click on the Fields tab, we can see all the fields in this data source in the JSON file. So we see name, category, city, state, ID, is featured, is favorite, park, coordinates, description, and image name there. If I now go into the list properties, I can see a lot of different properties in here. And we'll come back to that actually in just a second, because we're going to set the detail view up that will be on panel card 2. Let's see, do I need to make any changes here? Drag, scroll. I really only am going to be dragging in the y-axis direction, so I like to set that up appropriately, and I don't think I need to change. The layout type does need to change from a column layout type. We're going to go to a freeform layout type. We'll be defining a template to display the information, and I think that's about all we're going to need right now. So we'll say OK there. That says I haven't defined a template. Oh, yes, of course I haven't defined a template. Let's go ahead and do that in our list layout. Let's take a look. So this is like, what do we want the data to look like in this list itself? So let's go take a look at a predefined template and see if we can see something that's sort of close to what we want. And what we want looks like this. So we see an image over here, and the name of the landmark, disclosure icon over here, and then we've got a star if the list is our favorite or not. So this is another image. So let's see if we can find something that's sort of close to that. Let me go ahead and move this over, and let's see what we have that's close to what I want. So I think this is pretty close to it. And we can go ahead, well, this might even be a little closer. So let's go ahead and just grab that and say we do want an image on the left. And that'll show up there, and a disclosure icon on the right. And what disclosure icon do we want to use? You could say a subtle icon, or you can user define it. We may tweak that. So, but this is okay. We're just going for a template that makes some sense to us at this point. So we'll say okay, because we can modify all of that. And level 1 and level 2, these are your template placeholders. So our level 1 template placeholder is name, and level 2 template placeholder is favorite. And we'll say okay. And in this case, just say OK. And now we can click on Working Preview, and let's take a look at what we have. So we can see there is an image, although we haven't identified what it is. There's the name of the landmark, and we're seeing true and false along with the disclosure icon. So this is pretty good. I mean, right out of the chute, we've got something that we can work with. Now, obviously, we need to tweak this. But we've got something that works, and it scrolls, and of course if I tap on a row it'll highlight the row, but it doesn't do anything yet. So we'll be making some changes to this to bring this to life. Okay, next we're going to modify the template so that we can see the image. So let's click on the Design tab and into List Properties and go to List Layout. And here, on this line, you can see where the image is being set. The image source is being set. So let's go ahead and change this image source, and we're going to drop in a template placeholder, and we're going to use the data because we don't want the string, we want the actual picture. Data image name. So just double click on that, it will insert that, and I'm going to go ahead and set the width here. And we'll set the width equal to 50 pixels. That should be fine. And that's all we need to do there. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And let's go take a look at working preview and see how that worked out. Well, that looks pretty good. So now we see the image for the different landmarks. And the next thing we need to do here is change the true or false. If it's true, we want to see a gold star. If it's false, we don't want to see anything there. So we need to put an image in there based on some kind of condition, right? So let's go in and edit the template. Go into Design, go back into our List Properties, go into our List Layout. Okay, so when we look at this template and we're looking for is favorite, so we see is favorite is on this line right here. So name and is favorite this is the one that floats to the right. So this is the line that we're going to modify and put a conditional in there so that if is favorite equals true, we're going to display the star. So I'm going to go ahead and just move things around here a little bit. Let me just go ahead and cut that, and I'm going to paste it down here just to make things a little clearer in my own mind. This organization at this point doesn't really matter all that much, but sometimes it just makes it easier, to keep things clear in your own head. So what I'm going to do here is I don't really need this class at all. It's just mucking things up. I don't need it. And if I do find that I need the class, I'll add my own in. Because all we're going to do is display that star image. We do want to float it right. And then we want conditional logic in here instead of just having this placeholder text. So let's get rid of that. I'm going to drop this div down just so I can make this a little bit clearer. Again, in my own mind, I just want to make it easy for me to read. And what I'm going to do is now I'm going to insert some text that will contain essentially the templating language that I need in order to do what we need to do. So let's go ahead. I'm going to just paste this in so you don't have to watch me type it. But what we're saying here, so we start with a curly brace and a star. And now if is favorite equals true. So this is just like JavaScript here. If is favorite equals true, then image source is going to be from our images folder, the gold _ star _ 16 px.png, and then we close that all off with an end if tag. That's all you need to do there. I'm going to go ahead and say OK, and we'll go and look at working preview and see how that looks. And that's getting pretty close. We see the star is not aligned really the way I'd like it. So with CSS, I'm going to have to make some changes there. The alignment here with the name is a little bit off. This disclosure icon here is the wrong color. I want it to be a gray. If we go back to the landmarks, the sample app, we can see yeah, we want that centered and we want this to look gray and so on. But these are just CSS things that we just need to clean up, and that's actually quite simple. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to save this component. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close it. And I'm going to make a copy of this component because I like to keep these different component phases stored so that I can always get back to them. So in other words, if I just right click on this and I select duplicate and I have the landmarks.a5 component, I'm going to say this is landmarks underbar, and I'm just going to put in phase 1, and so it's just saving it in a known state so that whenever I go back, if I mess something up or whatever, I've got this duplicate component, but I know exactly what state it's in. So I'll continue to edit the landmarks component, but I can always get back to this one if I really mess things up. Okay, moving forward, I'm going to go ahead and double click on the landmarks component again and bring up the builder here, the UX builder. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a custom CSS style to this component, and I'm going to do that by including the file. So go to Properties, and it's easiest to just search for some of these properties because there's so many of them. So in this case, I want to look, I'm looking for linked, because I want to link in some CSS, and you can see you can link in CSS, SVG, JavaScript, or XBasic, but I want CSS, so that's fine. Leave that. It goes down to that property, so I don't have to go scrolling around looking for it. Double click on that, and then I can just select the file, in this case CSS, and it's landmarks custom CSS. So let's go ahead and open that up. And now every time this component loads, that CSS will load with it, and I can use those CSS classes within this component. And that's what I want to do to clean up the list control a little bit. So if we, let's go back to controls, and we'll take a look at working preview once again to look at our list. And let's see what we have. So we can see there's some alignment issues here. This is probably because I put the float right ahead of the name, so it's not floating properly, and that's all going to be addressed in the CSS style class. And then also this chevron is the wrong color. It should be a gray, and this text shouldn't be as bold as it is. So again, by using a CSS class, we can solve this very, very easily. Let's go back to design here. Let me go back into the web projects control panel. Let's take a look at the CSS file. So you can study this file and see what kind of changes I made. But the first change we're going to use is this class, landmarks list text. And you can see there's a float left that assigns the font size, alignment, color, and so on. So let's go ahead and just close that up. And back into the builder. Now, let's go into landmarks, into our list properties. We're going to go into the list layout, and this is where we're going to make some changes. So right now, here's our name placeholder, and we're going to get rid of this whole class right here because we want to assign a new class. We want to assign the class of landmarks list text to that div. That will straighten up the alignment there. And the other thing I want to do is I want to use a different image. I don't want to use this default image here. So I'll leave that there for now. Go and insert image. And we want to use an SVG icon. And we can select, and this is a whole list of SVG icons that is built into Alpha. And the one that we're looking for is a chevron. We could run the filter here, but I see it right away. It's right here. That's the one I want to use, the chevron right large. So I'm going to click on that. And the fill color, I want to change that to a gray. And I've defined a gray here in my palette, but you can pick anything you'd like. And now that's, yeah, that looks good. Let's click on OK. OK. And now that will be inserted into our template. And then we can go ahead and just get rid of the previous entry and click on OK. And take a look in working preview. Let's see what we have. Does this look better? And it does. So this is the disclosure looks right. The text looks right. It's aligned properly. So this is good. We're happy with that, and we're going to save it. So the next thing we need to tackle is the detail view. And what we want to do is when we click on a row, now it just highlights it. It doesn't do anything. We want to bring up a detail view, and the detail view has an image, a circular image, a map, and some further information about the landmark. And we can see that if we take a look in the SwiftUI application over here, we can see the behavior we're going for. So we tap on a row, and it brings up essentially another panel with a back button. In this case, this says landmarks. It has, and then we've got the title of the landmark here. We've got an image. We've got a map that is probably centered on the lat long that we have in our data list. And so this changes for every row that we tap on, and includes some information about the park down here and its location. Of course, this information that's now in the JSON data is just filler text, but you get the idea. So again, we tap on the row. We want to bring up a view that has a map, that has some information, that has an image, and ultimately we want to control that when you tap on the star, that it changes from a favorite to now to a non-favorite, and we'll get to all of that. So let's go ahead and move that out of the way. Okay, so when we think about it, what we need is, in our detail view, we definitely need a map. We need a picture, a circular picture centered on the, it's pretty much centered on the map, or the border there, and then some information about the park. So I'll click on Design, and we'll go back to our Details panel card. And the first thing we're going to do is change the property for the style. We don't need this. This background color was just so that we could see something going on, right? Okay, also in properties, body can scroll is checked, and the scroll axis is going to be vertical. The other thing that we'd like on this panel card is we'd like this panel card to scroll to the top on focus, so that every time the user were to pick a new landmark, that this panel card would come to the top and the map would be at the top, and so on. So we want that behavior. We set that in these properties here. Next, I'm going to add a panel card header here. Right-clicking on the Details panel card, select Panel Header. And this time, yes, we do want to include a control bar in the panel header. Say yes. Now, I'm going to click on the control bar, and we're going to click on the control bar properties here to edit it. So the first thing we want to do is we want to add a button that will navigate back to the landmarks panel card when it's clicked. So what we do is go into items, and we want to add a control bar item, and we want to add a button. So, and that is the default, but we'll just change the name here so that this is back button. And if make button text same as item name is checked, you can uncheck that, and make default action, leave that checked, and say OK. Now what we want to do, you'll notice that there's an action here called back button on click, and we're going to add some JavaScript that will be associated with that click event. But what I want you to do now is just go into the sub-theme here, and we'll set this into the left sub-theme. So that's going to give us the left pointing chevron and then the text. So we'll just get that as part of the theme. So you can leave this as text only. It doesn't really matter because we've specified the theme here. And then the button text by default here says button. We want it to say, we'll just have it say back. And at that point, we're done with this items. So now let's go look at actions. So here is our action. And this JavaScript was automatically generated. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that because we don't need it. And what we're going to do is we're going to insert some JavaScript, and we're going to call a method. And we're going to call a method of the component object. And you'll see this shortcut called it's a template holder dialog object that is referencing and will be filled in with the component object name, but you'll see that used throughout alpha. And what we want to do is we want to call a method to navigate to a certain panel. So if we just type in go down to the filter and just type in panel set, you'll see panel set active. So this is the method that we want, and we can just click on insert. So that comes on in, and then from here, just get rid of these placeholders here. And you can just go ahead and delete that and insert a space, and then this help will pop up. You can just right click on the UX panel name, and up pops a list of panels that we might want to navigate to. And we want to navigate to the landmarks panel card. So that's the one we're going to select, and we want to animate it into view, and that is just true. So that's the JavaScript we want to use. And we'll use something very similar to this in another place in this component, but just get used to using the methods of the essentially the component, and because there's a lot here and it can be very helpful for you. Okay, so let's just say okay with that. Oh, I actually wanted to look at some other things here, sorry. So let's go into the control bar layout and verify that we've got that set up right. And yes, we see the back button is in the before tab here. So this allows us to easily place things on that control bar and on the left side, the middle, and the right side, and so on. So right now we've just got this back button there, and that's all we need for right now. Let's go ahead and say okay. That looks good. So our control bar right now is set up the way I'd like it. And what I'm going to do now is we're going to add, remember we need a Google map. So let's go to data controls, and we'll just find the map, and we'll just insert a map. And label, we don't want to label, make sure that's set to none, and you can just use the defaults there. That's fine. Next thing that we'd like to add is an image. So there's an image that will be below the map. Again, it's going to be a data-bound image, so we're going to pick the data-bound image, and we're going to make sure the label position is none. You can leave the default value of image 1, say OK. That's going to come in, and the next thing I want to add is a freeform HTML area that I can just enter in some HTML. We'll be using placeholders when we do it. But if you jump into containers here, and we're going to enter in a freeform layout, and you can leave it labeled as such. I'm going to come up to the properties here, and for the HTML, I'm just going to enter the word about. Just something there so we can see it. We'll be adding placeholders in here a little bit later on. So let's say OK. So at this point, we've got this details panel card kind of set up the way we might want it. And from here, in order to populate these controls with some information from the list, go back to the list. So I'll click on the list, and we're going to come into the list properties and click on the list properties tab here and click on Has Detail View. It's right here. Once you click on that, you'll see another tab appears up top, and that is the Detail View tab. So let's click on that. Auto commit detail view on row select. Uncheck that because we're going to handle that through some code. And I don't want to actually auto commit the data. And above it is the detail view field map. So here we want to map the controls to the data that we have. So for example, we want to map the coordinates to the map. So that's done. And the next thing we want to do is map the image to the image control. So there we go. And that should be fine. So now we've got the detail view data mapped to the detail view from the list control. And the one thing that we need to do now is to say, okay, when you click on a list, bring up the detail view. So that's going to be in our list properties. And you can search for, it's on select. So in on select, we're going to add some JavaScript, find that property, and we can just double click on that to bring up the editor. And we're going to do the same thing that we did with the back button. So we're going to insert a method. It's going to be the panel set active. I'm going to insert that. And what we're going to do here is we're going to set a different panel active when you click on the row. So we'll hit the space, we'll right click on the UX panel name, we're going to bring up the details panel card, and then we're going to just say, yeah, go ahead and animate that in, and that should do it. So let's see what we have now. So let's go ahead and first off, let's save what we have. And let's take a look at working preview. Actually, before I do that, let me make sure I've set something. On this map control, I want to set the width to 100%. And I'm going to set the map height to 300 pixels. Map is draggable is checked. That's good. And let's see. I want to make sure that prevent scroll is checked, and it is by default. On the image, let's go to the image control. I'm going to want to set the width on this as well. So I'm going to set the width to 100% so that it will fill the panel card. Then I should be all set, right? So let's go ahead and save again. And let's now hit working preview. And I believe this should behave the way we'd like. We're getting close to it. I'll click on that row. Yep, and we can see the map. It's been centered on the lat lawn. We can see our image down here. We can see the about text in our HTML area. Now, this isn't styled the way we'd like it. You know, it's not circular with a drop shadow and all that stuff, and it's not positioned the way we'd like it. But we can see that we've got something going here, and we're getting close. So we can go between the different items, and we can see that the appropriate data is being presented and so on. So from here, we'll now go ahead and add some more placeholders in the HTML freeform area, and we'll start styling this the way we'd like. Okay, now that we have all these changes, I'm going to go ahead and save this component so that we've got a backup essentially with a known good state here. So you can also just click on File and Save As. In this case, we're going to use Landmarks Phase, and we'll just change this to 2 and go ahead and save it. Now when you do that, this component is now called Landmarks Phase 2, and that's not the one I want to be editing right now. So let's just go ahead and close it. We can see it here, and we'll just open the Landmarks component up again. Now what we want to do is we want to add, we want to make the image circular so that when we display that image, it's circular and it's got a border and a drop shadow, and it's centered on the map vertically and horizontally. So let's take a look at how we're going to do that. Click on the image control, and what we want to do is click on Advanced Image Display Options. Click on that and make sure crop image is checked, and the type we want is circle. The size we want here is 200, and let's see what else. Everything else looks okay. Vertical offset. So what we want to do is we want this thing to float above the map, and the vertical offset is going to be minus 110. You don't need to enter in px here. In fact, if you do, it will cause it to fail. So pixels is assumed. Image floats. Well, to allow this control to float up above the Google map, and click on OK. And at this point, the image should be all set up. Let's go look at working preview here. Go ahead and we'll tap on a row, and sure enough, it's starting to look pretty good. You can see we've got some things that we need to do with the freeform HTML area. We want to display some more landmark information in there. But yeah, as we go through the different list items and landmarks, we can see the image looks good. It's centered. It's looking sharp. So next, we'll go on and update the HTML controls. Okay, moving on, we're going to modify the freeform HTML area that just says about right now. And let's take a look at what we want to do. So we'll look at the SwiftUI application. And this is the way the detail view looks. So we can see we've got, this is the name of the landmark. Then there's a star, and we'll be adding that in at a later time. That allows you to denote a favorite. Then there's, this is the park name as opposed to the landmark name. So this is the park, and this is the state. And then there's this line here. And then about, again, the same name. So it's the landmark name. So about the landmark name. And then we see this descriptive text, that's placeholder text in the JSON. So we know what we need to do. We've got the name used a couple of times. We have the park name. We've got the state, and then we've got the description. Move that out of the way. Double click on the freeform control. We'll get rid of this about here. And I'm going to paste in the text that I used for this template, and I'll go through it and explain it. So everything is wrapped into a class called summary content. And if we go look at the landmarks custom CSS, hold on, let me just close that out and we'll do that. And you'll see in here summary content has a margin set up and padding and so on. So all of the different classes that you'll see me using are defined in landmarks underbar custom.css, and you can take a look at that and study, you know, exactly what I'm doing and how I'm doing the different things that I'm doing. So let's go back into that builder, and what we've done is there's a wrapper class, and then this is a class for the summary title, and notice I'm using landmarks name, and I'm using it here, and I'm using it here in the about. The way that you enter these placeholders in is very simple. You just go to insert list field, you pick the list, and you want the name, and there you can see the template drops in. And so this is the same for the park and the state and the description. The thing to note in here that's kind of cool is this gray text that represents, let me just show you that quick. That gray text is going to represent the park name and the state, and you notice the alignment here, right? So one is floats over to the left and one floats to the right, and then we also have to control the size of this so that you know that this doesn't flow down to another line and underneath this line. So I'll show you how I did that. It was really kind of neat and all handled in CSS, because you can see here I've just got two spans, one with a line left and one with a line right. Let's just say okay on that and come back in here, and you can see, so a line left floats left, And then I set the width to 75%. So that will actually make a column right there. And then align right just floats right. And gray text, which you're seeing, is just denoting the color of the text and the font size. So this is really nice to be able to just tweak this stuff, and you can tweak this as you're building these kind of components. Make changes to the CSS, save them, and it makes it really pretty easy to do these things. So I'm going to go back in and we'll take a look at that and make sure that all looks right, and it does. And so from here, I wanted to go back in here, and I just want to point out one more thing, and that is this div right here, which you might not know. What is that doing? Well, what it's doing there is it's going to clear out the floats. So that's what it does. Otherwise, the text would continue to say float right, because we're using that as our last float here. So, and then we've got the HR, which is a horizontal rule. That'll give us the line. All right, so let's go ahead and now take a look at that in working preview. I'll click on the row, bring it up. Yep, here we can see, and here you can see that column that I was telling you about. You know, it's consuming about 75% is what I'm allowing for that. And then Alaska, the state, aligns over on the right-hand side. So that's exactly what we wanted there. And this looks good. And we'll just go click on another park and bring that up. And again, we can see that same, that's worked out really well. Just a little minor CSS, and we have essentially the columns that we'd like, and it all looks good. So the next thing we need to do is to add the star in, and that needs to be a control that does something. So when we tap on it, it's going to set and designate that landmark as a favorite. Okay, next we want to add a star to the freeform area so that when the user taps on it, it denotes a favorite. Let's take a look at the behavior in the native Swift application. So that's over here. And what we want to do is when user taps on a row, they can select this star, then it turns gold. And when they go back, it's now one of the favorites. So I tap on it again, the state is maintained, it's a favorite. If I click on it again, it's no longer a favorite. I'll come back here and it's no longer a favorite. Turtle Rock will do the same thing. Turn it off, come back, and it's no longer a favorite. Okay, to do that, the first thing we're going to do is add a control into our details panel card. And we're going to do it right below this image one. And this time I'm going to tap on the add control. This is a nice little shortcut to know about. And in this case, we want a checkbox. So if you just type in check, and we're going to select a logical checkbox. And you can leave that name, logical checkbox 1 is fine. We don't need a label. And let's click on OK, and that comes in. Now we need to set some properties for this logical checkbox. The first thing is, what type of control is this? What kind of checkbox? Well, it's a logical. It's either going to be true or false in our case. Our JSON data indicates true or false. The next thing that I want to do is go to control properties. In control properties, we're going to want to set what is the checked image, what is the unchecked image, and what are the sizes and so on. So this color here, we're going to specify that, so don't even worry about that. We're going to actually, for a gold colored star, we're going to enter in a hex value there. So let me just take care of that. And in here, don't want the check. In our case, we want a star. So we'll filter it on star. And we can see we want a filled star. In our case, I'd like to have, well, let's say it's going to be 24 pixels is actually pretty good. We'll leave that. And the fill color, I'm going to make that fill color. It's hex FFD 300. And say OK. And that's going to be our fill color for that. That is fine. And now that's okay. And for the unchecked image, we're going to do something similar. We're going to go filter on star. We're going to pick the unfilled star this time. We'll leave that 24 pixel size. In this case, we want the stroke color. Black is fine, so we'll leave the stroke color to black. And that should be all set. So there we go. And for our checked value, what we're going to use is a JavaScript true. So otherwise, it's going to treat this value as a string. So in our case, we don't want that. We want the real JavaScript true. And the unchecked value is going to be JavaScript false. And this image size has been overridden, so it's because we specified it right directly in the selection for the SVG files. So we'll say OK. So now we've identified this this logical checkbox, and you'll notice it's in our display hierarchy here. We don't really want it to display here because we want it to display in the free form area. The way you do that is you hide it. So you turn hide on here. Now it won't, we're not going to see it in the hierarchy of this display here. And now we'll go into the freeform area now and double click on that. And notice that the placeholder logical checkbox now appears. And we want that to appear right next to the name. So you can just double click on that and that will appear now right next to the name. So that's what we want to do there. And the next thing we need to do is map the data from the list control to that logical checkbox. And in order to do that, just double click on the landmarks list and we're going to go to the detail view and we're going to go to the detail view map. And in this case, we're going to pick is favorite and we're going to map that field to this logical checkbox. Okay, that should make some sense because now we're mapping the data to that control, and this is now going to reflect the state of that, and it will also modify is favorite. So that should all make some sense. And let's see, customization here. Let's see, set indicator on edited rows. We want to turn that off. And that is an indicator that's in the list control, and I don't want to see that because we're going to just strictly update the value of the star. So that's all we need when a change is made there. Okay, now the next thing that we need to do is we want to commit the data. So when the user makes a change and they check on the checkbox, when this details panel card, when we lose focus on that and we move back to the landmarks panel card, we want to make a commit of the data. So in order to do that, we have to use some JavaScript. Okay, so right now we need to, what I did was I've included the JavaScript for this component in a file. And there's a lot of ways you can actually share JavaScript in files, but I'm going to show you an easy way of doing this. We're going to come into the JavaScript functions, and I'm going to click this little book thing, and it's a code library. And what we're going to do is, first thing I'm going to do is create a new library. So go down to menu and say I want to create a new library. And this will just be like my JavaScript. You could call it anything you want. So this is just a library of stuff that you might want to use. Say OK. And then you want to add something. If you have something on the clipboard, which I did, it's going to show up. You don't even need to worry about that. Just click Load from File. And the JavaScript, let's show you where it is. So in the tutorials, in the web project, and this is the project we're playing around with in JS, is Landmarks.js. So just double click on that, and then the Landmarks JavaScript will come in. Just say OK. And this is actually the first line of code. So it says Landmarks app supporting JS. That's OK. Good enough. And now all I have to do is just double click on it, and it will include that JavaScript in the component. So that's saved. And any component I use in this installation of Alpha now, I can access these functions. So that's kind of a nice way of building up a library of functions that you might end up using. So this is the function we're going to be calling. It's commit data, and ultimately what this does is it's going to update the list object from the UX controls that have been mapped. That's what this code does. Okay, so now go back to controls, and I want to go to the back button that's in the control bar. So in the control bar properties, I want to go to actions. When the back button on click is fired, we now want to call the commit data function that we just added. And that should now be all set. So if we were to take a look at this in working preview, let's see what we've got. If I click on Turtle Rock, and I should see that it's a star is there. Notice I can now click on the star, and now it's not filled. Go back, and it's not filled here. I'll go to Silver Salmon Creek, come on down, we'll make it a favorite, go on back, and now it's a favorite. So we've got the behavior, the exact behavior we were looking for. Next, we'll add the isFavorite filter. Okay, next we're going to add the favorites button. So let's take a look at the SwiftUI application and just look at this behavior. So you can see the label is here, and there is a light gray line up above and below, sort of framing the switch, and then of course the switch which toggles the favorites. But also notice that the favorites button is part of the list. It's not in the, say, panel card header. It's actually in the list, and as the list scrolls up, it scrolls up with it. So that's the behavior that we're going to be looking for. So let's talk about how to do that. So the first thing that we need to do is we're going to be putting the control, so the switch control, inside a row in the list. So the way to do that is come down to the end of the panel navigator, and we're going to have to create what's called injectable content. And so we're going to come down to containers, select a container, and select injectable content, and we're going to insert after. So you'll notice that this is after the panel navigator, and this is not going to be displayed in the view hierarchy, so that's why we can include the container where it is. And inside this container, this is where we're going to put the switch, and then we can include this injectable container within the list, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up another container because I want to frame this, and I'm going to insert after. And the reason that we're going to do this is for those light gray top and bottom border that we saw that were framing the switch. So I'm going to set the container width to 100%. I'm going to set, and here I'm just going to use an inline style. I could use a class, but sometimes it's just as easy to use an inline style. So in this case, so we'll say container style, and we can just go down to borders. So we can say, okay, our top style is going to be, oh, I gotta click on this, is going to be solid. And the width is going to be 1 pixel. And the color, let's go select the color. It's going to be that light gray. And say okay. And so that's our top style. And then we're going to do the same thing for the bottom. So let's go find bottom style here. There we go. So we're going to have solid. We're going to have 1 pixel. And our bottom color is going to be that gray as well. Okay. So that's going to establish those lines that we saw. And then let's now include a switch. So I'm going to say add control and just filter on switch. So just type in switch and there you go. Okay. And switch 1 is fine. In this case, we're going to want to use a label. And so I've got the label set. Always make control label, same as the name. Doesn't have to be. We can set this, so we can go ahead and set that once we get into the builder. So I just click on OK. And that includes our switch. Now, let's see. I'm going to want to set the switch width here at 55 pixels. I just know this from experimentation, and I've defined a sub-theme called small. And this is a switch that I designed that's a derivative of the original base switch. And it's been included as a style tweak. I just like the sizing a little bit better, so that was just something I did on my own. But it's included in this project. So that's good. Our control container width here needs to be set at 100% as well. And our label, we want the label to say, favorites only. Favorites only. We're going to assign this to a class because I've defined a class for the styling on the label just to make sure the text is the right size and so on. So click on class. And if you scroll down, we'll find a favorites label text class. Hit the plus sign. So now we're assigning that class to that and just say OK. So that's fine. On the width, we want to do, this is for the label width, and just set this up at 250 pixels, and that will be fine so that we don't end up with a 2-row string, if you will. So favorites only, and all of that looks just fine. Okay, so that's our injectable container that we're going to have to now include in the landmarks list. So now go up to the list, the landmarks list, and into list properties. Right here, click on that tab. And where it says has data header, I'm going to check that. And for the header HTML, I'm going to click on this link that says insert content from an injectable container. And there's our injectable container. And this is a placeholder for that container. So that should be fine. So let's say OK. Say OK. And let's just look quickly at what do we have. So just click on working preview. Let's see what we've got. And sure enough, here's our label and here's our control. And our control is working. It's not doing anything yet, but it's doing the job, and it is scrolling with the list. So we've got the look that we're looking for here, and now we just have to wire in the JavaScript. I'll go back to design, and on the switch itself, so we'll go back down to the switch, and now what we want to do is assign the JavaScript that's going to fire on the onSelect event. And notice in the help, which is down here, that this will return a value of this dot value. So we can use that to determine is that switch on or is it off. So let's take a look at what we've got here. So I'm going to click on this and bring up the JavaScript editor, and I'm just going to paste in the JavaScript so I don't have to type it. So what we're saying here is if this value equals on, then call filter list. Otherwise, call clear filter list. And these are functions, JavaScript functions that have been defined in our JavaScript functions. So let's go take a look at what that is. I'm going to go ahead and save this component now. We've almost got it completely finished. Let's go back into JavaScript functions, and here we have got filter list and clear filter list. So here's our filter list function. We get a pointer to the list object, and then we set the filter to this regular expression, and the clear list filter just sets it to false. So those are the two functions that we're calling. So let's go ahead and then take a look at that. Let's go back to working preview and see what we've got. So now when I toggle it, you'll see that the list is being filtered. If I, let's say, go in here and I change this to a favorite, go back, and then filter it on my favorites, so there we can see I've got those four. So we've got all of the functionality that we're looking for, and we're almost done with this, but we can make it even better. Let's take a look at the iOS application and just take a look at some of the behavior. So when I tap on a row, notice that the landmark name appears in the panel card header. This will be our control bar in our component. And notice that the button here says landmarks. Now when I tap on that and now select Silver Salmon Creek, notice that this button has changed to back. And the reason is because this name may overcome, if this were landmarks, it would overcome it. And based on the size of the display on the device, this is going to automatically adjust. It's this kind of polish that iOS apps have, and it's what users really expect to see in an application. So let's see if we can tackle that in our Alpha Anywhere application. Now to add the landmark name to the control bar in the details panel card, we can use templating to do that. So I'll double click on the control bar, and we can go to items, and we're going to add a control bar item. And this is just some HTML, so we could go with the default HTML1 tag, and we can certainly remember that. And for our HTML text, I'm going to create a div. Let me paste this in so I don't have to type it all out. But the div ID is going to be landmark name header, and the class is landmark name header. So this is going to control our styling. And this ID is going to be important when I ask the browser how much space does this name actually take up. And notice here I've used a placeholder list landmarks name. I did that by doing insert list field landmarks name, and if you do that, that'll just drop that right in. We don't need it in two places, so that looks good. Click on OK. And the next thing we need to do is add this HTML to our control bar layout. So go to the control bar layout tab, and we're going to edit this line. And in the middle, we're going to add, and notice we've got this HTML1, so we'll just go ahead and add that. That's going to have our landmark name. Go say OK. That looks good. OK there. And now we can click on Working Preview. And we'll tap on Turtle Rock, and sure enough, we see Turtle Rock up there. I'll go back, the Silver Salmon Creek, go back. So this is all working the way we would expect. Now the next thing we're going to tackle is this back button, so that it sometimes will say landmarks and other times will say back, based on the size of the landmark name. So to do that, we're going to go back to design. And we're going to click on double click on the control bar again. click on the Data tab, and we're going to add a data item. And in this case, we're going to call this back button text. And I'm going to check update value automatically based on a watch event. So here we want to pick a control that's going to change when the detail view comes into view. Well, the image is always going to change, so that's a good one to check for this particular case. And what it means is watch this image. When it changes, run this JavaScript. And the JavaScript that we're going to run right now is return set back button text. And this function is defined in our JavaScript function. So we'll take a look at that after we see what it does. Next, I need to modify the back button in items. So come into the back button, and instead of the back button text being back, we're going to change that, and we're going to use a placeholder, back button text. So we'll just insert that, and we'll get rid of back. So the result of the set back button text function is going to be returned in this placeholder. So that's what we're going to see. So let's say OK there. And our control bar layout is already fine because it has the back button in it. So now we should be good to go. So let's go take a look at what it's going to do. So in working preview, click on Turtle Rock, and it says back. Go back, I'll click on Silver Salmon Creek, and it says back. And I'll click on Chilcote Trail, and it says back. Well, is it ever going to say something other than back? Let's try Icy Bay. Oh, see, Icy Bay fits because landmarks doesn't overcome Icy Bay. So this is working exactly the way we would expect it to. Notice it says back here. And so it's only on that short name that can say landmarks with an iPhone 4 layout. So let's try a different layout. So this time we'll go to an iPhone 6 vertical and go back. And let's try one of the longer names. And notice now, oh, it works for Charlie Rivers. It works for Lake McDonald. It's close, but it works. We might want to adjust our math there a little bit, but it's close. Twin Lake works. Will anything overcome it here? Yeah, Silver Salmon Creek, the longest name, is now showing back. So this behavior, this is real polish, and this is exactly what an iOS user expects to see. So let's go take a look at the function set back button text and see what it does. Go back to design, go into JavaScript functions, and here's our set back button text. And what I'm doing here is I'm looking at the div landmark name header, and I'm computing the size with window get computed style, getting the width of that with this call right here. So this is really the key. Like, how much space will that string take up with that font and that style and so on? And this little magical it's a function of the DOM, gets me all that information. Then from there, it's just some math to figure out, okay, well, what size is it, and is it going to fit? And if it's, if it's certain size, return the button text of landmarks. Otherwise, return the button text of back. I'll leave that for you to look at, but that's what's going on there. So this is great. We've accomplished everything we want, and there's one more thing we can do to really add some polish to this app. Let's take a look at this iOS application and just watch what happens with landmarks as I tap on a row. Notice how it animates in position and size. So it morphs into like the back button. That is just a really cool look. And it's something that we can come pretty close to doing in the alpha application. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so in the static text control, I'm going to add a class to this. And the class we're going to add is going to be title text. Click on this plus button to add it, and that's okay. Now next, because what we want to do is we want to animate something into position when the user taps on a row in landmarks and brings up the detail view. And then when the user taps on the back button in the detail view, we want to sort of reverse that animation. So let's go into landmarks, in the list properties. And under list properties here, we're going to go and we can search for onSelect. onSelect. Here we go. Find that property and let's modify that. So instead of calling this details panel card and setting the panel active, I'm going to change that. I'm going to use a JavaScript function here. And the JavaScript function that we're going to call is show details panel card. Okay? And click on OK here. And then in the back button, so the back button in this control bar, under Actions, I'm going to modify this so we'll remove this panel set active and we'll call show landmarks panel card. Now let's take a look at the effect. When I tap on the row, look closely at the landmarks title here, and it will animate up into the corner, and the size will change. When I come back, it animates back down. So it's a cool little effect that was really pretty easy to add in, and just adds a little bit more pop to the application. So let's take a look at the JavaScript that's running there. In JavaScript functions, these are my two functions that I'm calling. Show landmarks panel card and show details panel card. So in show landmarks, I'm getting a pointer to the title text. And then notice what I'm doing here. I'm removing a class called move. And that's when I go to show the landmarks panel card. And when I go to show the details panel card, I add that class move into it before I show the panel card. And I have a little delay here, so I've got a 125 millisecond delay to let that animation show a little bit. Let's go look at the CSS that's involved with that. Scroll down to the bottom and you'll see here is our title text class, and you'll see the transform and the transition. So we're setting a half-second ease in, ease out transition, and we're translating to the 0, 0 point. And then when we add the move class, we move the text minus 30 pixels in the Y direction. So that's bringing it up. And our scale is going down to 0.25. So it's these two, and we're also modifying the opacity. So all of this happens when we transition to the details panel card, and all of this happens when we come back to the landmarks panel card. So that's a nice little trick to know about and pretty easy to implement with a couple of lines of CSS. It's really quite nice. So that wraps up this tutorial on Chapter 1 of using Alpha to build an application that's very, very similar to an iOS application built with SwiftUI. Right now, this is an HTML5 application that could be installed on a device in a browser, but it could also be converted to a Cordova app and installed directly onto a device, say through the App Store. We'll show you how to do that in future tutorials. But I hope you've enjoyed this, and if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to follow the links that will be listed in the video comments. Thanks so much.